I feel like I've been set up. Kong Ming'an's real purpose for this trip had always been the million-year spirit beast, the Tianmeng iceworm. He had put that plan on hold earlier because higher priority matters like the imprint spirit tool and the artificial spirit ring device demanded attention, and because of the looming threat of the Silver Dragon King. Now, having just learned the incarnation method, he had no further worries. It was the perfect moment to act. At the edge of the Star-Dew Great Forest, ancient trees rose like pillars, vines coiled tightly, and the air was thick with the damp, woody scent of the wild. The forest lay mostly silent, broken only by distant, low roars of spirit beasts that put any traveler on edge. Despite that, a handsome young man and a petite young woman strolled leisurely among the trunks, bickering under their breaths. Suddenly, a thicket to their side exploded outward. Several gray-black shapes lunged with furious cries, wind baboons with roughly 100 years' cultivation. They bared fangs and sprang as fast as the wind, claws aimed at the two walkers. The petite woman merely took half a step forward, flicked a fingertip, and the air answered with a sharp crack. A wave of extreme cold spread from her touch. The very atmosphere seemed to stiffen. The baboons, frozen mid-lunge, were encased in thick ice like sculptures. They smashed to the ground and shattered into a spray of crystal shards. The woman, actually the Ice Emperor in a manifested form, snorted. "This incarnation is uselessly weak. I could blow harder than that." Transferring her consciousness into this vessel from her main body, she felt constrained by the feeble power. "What did you expect me to make? A god? I'm only a human incarnate, just a spirit ancestor in a borrowed shell." Kong Ming'an shot her an annoyed look. His own strength had leapt dramatically, but against the Ice Emperor he still felt slightly inferior. The Ice Emperor scowled at her incarnation and continued to complain. "The proportions are all wrong. I feel shorter than I should." "That's impossible," Kong retorted, raising an eyebrow. "The model strictly follows your main body, exactly the same height and build." "You're lying," she bristled. "There's no way I'm this small." Kong made a pitying face. "It's not you." The Ice Emperor reddened with anger. Under the sound-sealing mental barrier Kong had imposed, she could only grit her teeth. They continued walking, grumbling at one another, the bickering almost casual. Then the ground suddenly shuddered. Trees ahead toppled as if crushed by a titanic weight, and a sweeping wave of mental pressure crashed toward them. Cold chi seeped into the air, the sky dimmed, and a massive, plump, white silkworm-shaped form rose from the earth. Its body was as clear as jade, tinged with faint gold, exuding unbearable cold. 10 golden circular markings orbited its flank, radiating vast spiritual fluctuations. "Wah!" Big Brother finally sensed a human with mental attributes. "Let Big Brother see what this lucky fellow looks like." The Tianmeng iceworm's smug voice echoed across the mental plane. When the worm's gaze found the two below, so calm and still bickering, it blinked in surprise. They should have been terrified, should have prostrated themselves. Yet they merely muttered at one another. Before the worm could sort out its confusion, the young man gripped the woman with one hand, flashed a ridiculously benevolent smile skyward, and then, bang, bang! 2 violent explosions detonated almost simultaneously. The 2 figures blew apart without warning. The shockwave plowed the ground, leaving cratered earth where the lovers had stood. The Tianmeng iceworm hovered in midair, dumbfounded. They, self-destructed, without a word? Are they that terrifying? Wait, this energy signature. It isn't human. Alarmed, the worm began to burrow frantically, but a crushing pressure descended at once. A colossal, dark green hand, so vast it blotted out the sky, materialized and gripped the worm. The hand carried an oppression that silenced everything. The worm was sealed in an instant. A figure of Poison Immortal materialized and tossed out a metal block etched with a spirit tool matrix. The block warped open like a metal bloom, and a one-time spatial gateway snapped into existence. Holding the unmoving, spherical Tianmeng iceworm, Poison Immortal flung it through the gateway. The beast disappeared, and the portal collapsed. Poison Immortal clapped once, as if he'd merely finished a daily chore. Done. Time to clock out. His mission had been simple: strike and capture when ordered. He had completed it perfectly, and now withdrew. The violent contest from more than a year ago, when Ming'an had repeatedly beaten him with the reign over the world technique, yet spared his life, had taught him much. Enduring Mu'en's power hundreds of times had left him with a tantalizing insight, something about his own will fusing with spirit power, mental force, and chi blood. It felt profound and mysterious, but he couldn't grasp it fully. He hoped to return soon and chase that hint of understanding to its limit. With that, he blinked out and the Stardew Great Forest fell back into its usual silence. Undead Demiplane, Special Confinement Laboratory. Consciousness returned to the Tianmeng iceworm from a roaring chaos. It found itself disoriented, unable to recall what exactly had happened. I met a human with mental attributes, it thought hazily. They exploded, and now how did I end up here? It tried to move, but found its body held fast by countless faintly glowing energy chains. It couldn't draw on its spirit power or mental force, only awareness remained. Forcing open its eyes, the worm's vision cleared to reveal several figures standing before it. Its attention snagged on the young woman, radiating intense cold. Surprise flickered through its gaze. Ice Emperor? Is that really you, Ice Emperor? The Ice Emperor frowned. Without answering, she grabbed Kong Ming'an's hand, pulled him squarely in front of her, and leaned against his side, using his body to block the worm's view. Tianmeng froze as if struck by lightning. The Tianmeng iceworm's gaze settled on the human youth before it, trying and failing to read him. It couldn't make sense of what had happened, but after a pause, it forced a bluff. Who are you? Why did you capture me? Kong Ming'an didn't answer right away. He glanced at the Ice Empress behind him. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Then he looked away and gently lifted a hand. A golden, shimmering contract scroll unfurled out of thin air and hovered in front of the worm. The Tianmeng iceworm's consciousness swept over it and quickly understood the terms. A long-term labor contract with restricted freedom, surrender of its soul skill module for research, and minimal benefits. The one thing it prized most, permission to live. Kong Ming'an's voice was calm as he finally spoke. Sign the contract. The iceworm hesitated, conflicted. It tried to stall. Are there any other options? Under that faint glimmer of hope, Kong Ming'an inclined his head. There are. The restraining energy chains tightened in an instant. A pain that reached into its soul and marrow hit the worm. Its massive body shuddered, and it emitted a soundless keening. Struggling was useless. After only a second or two, Kong Ming'an relaxed his hand, and the agony ebbed like a tide. He regarded the creature coolly. The second option is erasing your consciousness and using you as research material. The worm trembled. With the last of its will, it imprinted its soul mark on the end of the contract and spoke, voice full of trembling loyalty. Hello, boss. Tianmeng reporting for duty. Any orders for me? Kong Ming'an paused for the first time in a while. The speed and decisiveness of its submission made him glance at the Ice Empress. Has he always been like this? She answered with a trace of indifference, but she looped her hand through his and leaned against him. What kind of backbone do you expect from a creature that's only useful because of its age? Kong Ming'an said nothing further and simply nodded. Turning back to the worm, he smiled in a manner that was more benevolent than sincere. Welcome aboard. Thank you, boss. The Tianmeng iceworm's eyes leaked tears. Survival mattered more than pride. After collecting the few soul skill modules the creature possessed, Kong Ming'an had Elder Yi take the worm away. It was too risky to keep such high-level research material under his direct control. The ice worm was not the Snow Empress. The Snow Empress would cooperate without question and trust him absolutely. The ice worm might not. Better to hand it over to Elder Yi for study. With Elder Yi's strength, they might even learn how to forge a million-year spirit ring, or something like a divine ring. Once Elder Yi left, only Kong Ming'an and the Ice Empress remained in the lab. The Empress let go of his hand and put a little distance between them, turning her face away as if she didn't want to speak. What's wrong? Kong Ming'an asked, genuinely puzzled. Nothing. Let's go back, she said, and shook her head. He didn't press the issue. They returned to the Mingmeng Chamber of Commerce base in Shrek City. Kong Ming'an would be staying there for the foreseeable future. The Tang San he'd been watching had set out for Shrek 3 months early. Despite being repeatedly robbed and beaten on the road, it was clear he would reach Shrek Academy. Kong Ming'an felt a surge of excitement. This might be the beginning of his plan. They walked down the long corridor. Kong Ming'an ahead, the Ice Empress a half step behind and to his side. Unlike the Snow Empress, who habitually concealed herself completely as a personal guard and rarely showed her form, the Ice Empress favored standing openly at his side, never leaving his shadow. She lifted her head to look at his profile as he toyed with the Tianmeng Iceworm's soul skill module, and then, after a moment, asked, "Do you sign contracts with everyone the way you did just now?" Without turning, he examined the module and answered casually, "Generally, no. The usual method is to show sincerity and give a choice, see if the other party is willing to sign. That's the conventional way. For some who refuse to cooperate but are too valuable for research, like certain evil soul masters, we use more direct methods. An irreversible slave contract. Evil soul masters aren't treated as people. As for the Tianmeng Iceworm, this is a labor contract. A million-year spirit beast is too valuable to let go. I captured it first. We'll decide what to do later." The Ice Empress fell silent, her fingers twisting the hem of her skirt. Her voice dropped, almost unconsciously nervous. "What about me?" Kong Ming'an didn't break stride. You're different." Something like hope sparked in her chest and then was immediately snuffed out. He continued, almost offhand. "Besides, you were brought here by the Snow Empress. If I pressured you, she might not be angry at me, but she would be unhappy, and I don't want her unhappy." The hope vanished. The Ice Empress drew a long breath to steady herself, but her face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from anger. She wanted to bite him. Anything, even a lie, would have been better than that indifferent truth. Kong Ming'an, still fidgeting with the module, felt an icier heat beside him and turned to see a pair of golden eyes glaring. "What's wrong?" "Go to hell, you bastard!" she snapped, then punched him lightly in the lower back. She held back enough that it didn't hurt much, but her resentment overflowed. Kong Ming'an watched her storm off and fell silent for a beat, trying to figure out when he had annoyed her this time. She had always been like this lately, calm and collected one moment, abruptly furious the next, calling him bastard and go to hell in tones that felt almost affectionate. It wasn't particularly damaging, but it was aggravating. Back in the lab he had set up in the Chamber of Commerce base, Kong Ming'an placed the 2 soul skill modules he had taken on the table and let his eyes flicker. He thought about the sub-brain concept he'd drafted long ago, an idea he'd shelved and abandoned. Now, holding those modules, he felt he might finally have found a way to make it work. 103. Duluo Continent Regional Network Concept. A day after returning from the demiplane, Kong Ming'an turned his attention to the 2 soul skill modules he had been shaping, spiritual probing and spiritual sharing. He found Huo Yuhao at work, and, by overlaying his spirit aura with the nascent modules he'd taken from Tianmeng and guiding them through repeated adjustments, completed both skills. Spiritual probing and spiritual sharing were simple in concept, but in practice they offered many possibilities. He murmured to himself as he sorted through the implications. Spiritual probing released mental force to form an invisible perception field. Everything inside that field, terrain, objects, fluctuations of energy, even life auras, was fed back into the caster's mind in a 3-dimensional, omnidirectional, God's eye view. It had considerable range and could partly penetrate obstacles. Spiritual sharing was more remarkable. It didn't just enable spiritual telepathy, it could directly inject information from the caster's mind into another consciousness's spiritual sea. Combined, the 2 allowed one to gather information with probing and project that data, intact and in real time, into a designated target's mind, true perspective sharing. Kong Ming'an understood the principle quickly. He imprinted the 2 modules onto his spirit ring. With the ring floating beside him, he poured spirit power and mental force into them and activated spiritual probing himself. Instantly, everything within a few hundred meters flooded his consciousness. The staff moving through the guild office, the supplies stacked in the warehouse, even the delicate-faced Ice Empress standing before him. The torrent of data hit him like a tide. He frowned instinctively at the sheer volume. When he eased the intensity of his mental force, the clarity and range of the feedback dropped, settling into a normal observational state. He tried it several times and reached a conclusion. Probing's effectiveness, its range, precision, and penetration, depended on the intensity and quality of the mental force and spirit power invested. Enhancing the effect simply consumed more resources. In short, spiritual probing created a temporary mental force perception field that collected all data within it. Spiritual sharing created a one-way channel to deliver that information to another mind. To test the sharing side, Kong Ming'an opened a gate to the undead demiplane and casually dragged out a Spirit King rank evil soul master whose spirit power had been sealed. Before the creature could react, Kong Ming'an used probing to gather an unprocessed raw information stream and forced it straight into the target via spiritual sharing. The evil soul master screamed. His eyes bulged, bloodshot, his body convulsed. He rolled his eyes, foamed at the mouth, and collapsed. Kong Ming'an slapped the creature with mental force until it stirred. When it woke, its gaze was empty and hollow, drool ran from its lips, and it made meaningless gurgles. He'd been driven insane. "What happened?" the Ice Empress asked, blinking. "An experiment." Kong Ming'an dispelled the mental force in his hand and explained calmly. "I forcibly injected the raw, unprocessed information stream collected by spiritual probing into his mind through spiritual sharing. His mind tried to analyze that enormous, disordered influx and instantly overloaded. He's still alive physically, and his soul is present, but his consciousness collapsed." The Ice Empress didn't understand the technicalities, but she sighed and pouted. "Anything that ends up in your hands turns into something incomprehensible." Kong Ming'an chuckled, pushed the ruined evil soul master back into the demiplane, and continued thinking. Junk information bombing was the crudest application. If that data transfer could be precisely controlled, it would be an efficient means of information exchange, what he cared about most. If spiritual sharing were the core technology and probing were used as a grid of base stations, placed at intervals, they could cover vast areas and achieve near-zero delay exchange. A local area network for the Duluo continent. Extend it continent-wide, pair it with the monitoring capability of probing, and you could build an invisible spiritual surveillance network, one that would streamline daily life and information flow and simultaneously monitor for hidden threats like evil soul masters, locating them the instant they appeared. A grand blueprint began to take shape, but the project would be massive and not immediate. His first practical need was simpler, a tool to assist his thinking and provide additional computing power. Spiritual sharing could link multiple consciousnesses. Could he create a host consciousness to act as a central coordinator, controlling many subconsciousnesses to process different streams of information? If so, he could harness the combined processing power of many minds to accelerate his own thinking. Subconsciousnesses would be easy to obtain. The souls of evil soul masters were plentiful. The real challenge was the host. The host would need enormous capacity and information processing strength. Otherwise, it would collapse under the load. Tianmeng was theoretically possible. Its million-year mental force foundation made it a candidate, but it was valuable research material and risky to reconfigure. The golden ancient tree, the future life core, had unparalleled size and vitality and could certainly carry the load, but it was Shrek's lifeline and currently unavailable. Modifying it would be difficult. He didn't need a perfect solution right away. A transitional product for testing would suffice, something he could risk. The requirements were clear. It needed to carry complex information streams without collapsing, provide information organization and classification functions, and be programmable. As he went over those needs, his eyes fell on the spirit ring quietly suspended in his palm. Kong Ming'an raised an eyebrow. The spirit ring's properties suddenly seemed versatile in many more ways than he'd first realized. Chapter 104, Zhang Lexuan, a level 98 team leader. Surely nothing will go wrong? Zhang Lexuan walked slowly down the tree-lined path of Shrek Academy. Tall and composed, she had an aloof grace that kept most people at a distance. It had been years since that disastrous defeat, but the memory of that one-sided rout still hung over the academy like a persistent fog. 4 of the 7 main team members had withdrawn from the school outright. The 7 reserve members had been tainted by association, though they were largely ignored since they hadn't actually participated. All the blame and disappointment settled on the 3 main team members who had stayed. Above all, on her. As captain, she had been labeled irresponsible and accused of all manner of failings. Elder Mu had publicly declared the matter closed, but it was only lip service. Private criticism never stopped. The chill of exclusion was unmistakable. In both the outer and inner courts, except for a few close friends like Wu Ming and Han Ruoruo, most people either ignored her or avoided her altogether with awkward, complex expressions. That silent alienation cut at her. The Academy cared so much about the glory of never being defeated, yet it looked the other way at corruption growing inside its walls. She found that moral blindness souring. She watched as students scattered at her approach like startled birds. The daily indifference had become a cold wall pressing on her chest. A year and a half ago, Elder Mu had overruled objections and given her special judicial authority. When evidence was clear, she could bypass endless meetings and hold independent trials. Act first, report later. It had been intended as a sharp sword to cut down long-entrenched problems, but it had also made her many enemies. Under the scheming of corrupt factions, her reputation had been deliberately smeared. She was not afraid of gossip in principle, but the steady, everyday coldness wore on her. When her patrol finished, she returned to her dormitory. The room felt lonelier than usual. She closed the door, shrugged off her uniform jacket, and let it fall over the back of a chair. Every ounce of energy seemed to drain from her. She moved a few steps and collapsed forward onto the bed, sinking into the softness. A soft, weary sigh escaped her. She lay still, trying to let the weight of the day slide off her shoulders. After a long while, she turned onto her back. The room's light traced the lines of her mature figure as her chest rose and fell. She adjusted her position. Her legs, clad in black stockings, shifted with a faint rustle in the quiet. She lifted a hand to her forehead, rubbing a headache away. She had found nothing, no new evidence of the corruption. It wasn't that Shrek had suddenly cleaned up. Those who were corrupt had simply become more careful, burying their tracks deeper. Without proof, she could not pass judgment. The powerlessness of knowing the rot was there, but being unable to expose it gnawed at her. If she found even a shred of conclusive evidence, she would not hesitate to deal with it decisively. She wanted Shrek clean again. Was that even possible? She knew these problems were no longer superficial. In some places, the rot ran deep. Could she alone turn it around? The question settled over her like a cold tide. Exhaustion pulled at her consciousness, a haze of fatigue, and with it the memory of a young man and his promise crept into her thoughts. "Call you, and you shall come." She murmured the words and then chastised herself for indulging in faint hope. She forced herself up, went to the washroom, and splashed cold water on her face. After a quick wash, she sat cross-legged on her cultivation mat, cleared her mind, and entered meditation. Time slowed. Only when the sky began to pale did she open her eyes and let out a long, heavy breath. Her spirit power felt a little firmer, more consolidated. Level 79. One step from level 80. With another month of hard cultivation, she would break through, and then she would need to hunt for a spirit ring to become a true spirit Duluo. Only by becoming a spirit Duluo could she legitimately claim a place within the Sea God Pavilion as an elder and have real authority in academy affairs. Strength was what mattered in this world. Even with Elder Mu's backing, her status as a spirit saint left her with limited clout. She had to grow stronger, become a spirit Duluo, then a titled Duluo, then a super Duluo. With that kind of strength, she might stand a chance against the resistance and have a real opportunity to change Shrek. Despite how rotten things seemed, she still wanted to try, at least for now. The spirit ring I can handle right now would be around 80 to 90,000 years, she thought. Hunting that alone would be difficult. Inner court disciples could apply to have the academy organize a spirit hunting team to help acquire a ring after a breakthrough. Usually, the academy assigned a team leader teacher to provide covert protection. The spirit ring itself had to be earned by the hunting team as part of their tempering. Of course, all of this cost contribution points, earned by killing evil soul masters and completing inner court missions. She had fought enough evil soul masters that she had the points to apply. I'll ask Wu Ming and Roro to come, she thought. With them, hunting for a spirit ring would be far easier. She rose to leave only to discover that Wu Ming was leading a team on a mission and Han Roro had entered seclusion to break a bottleneck. Neither was available. With no other option, she submitted her application. Fortune was on her side. A spirit hunting team was being formed, leaving in 2 months. She checked the roster. The members were competent and balanced. With her in the group, any spirit beast under 100,000 years, unless it had an unusually powerful bloodline, should be within their capability. She felt a measure of relief when she saw who the team leader teacher would be. Elder Xuan's name stood at the head of the list. With Elder Xuan leading the team, Zhang Lexuan told herself, a level 98 super duo at the helm, I suppose nothing will go wrong. Even as she tried to convince herself, a sliver of doubt lingered behind the words. Chapter 105, Soul Hunt Departure and the Lingshu Protocol. Time flowed, and 2 months passed in a flash. On the inner courtyard plaza of Shrek Academy, the morning light was just beginning to brighten. Zhang Lexuan stood in the center of the plaza, dressed in practical, sharp attire, waiting for the teammates who would be hunting spirit rings with her, according to the mission log. Her gaze was calm. Rank 80 spirit power flowed slowly within her. 2 months of training had paid off. Her spirit power had broken through to rank 80, and she only needed 1 spirit ring to advance further. Figures arrived one after another until there were 12 of them, Zhang Lexuan included. Fortunately, most were acquaintances who had fought alongside her on missions against evil soul masters. They knew each other well. There was none of the cold distance others sometimes put between themselves and Zhang Lexuan, only clear trust. Seeing that the designated team leader had not yet appeared, Zhang Lexuan took charge. She asked everyone to give their names, spirit types, and roles, letting them quickly familiarize themselves with each other's combat styles and decide on coordination. They had just finished when a ripple tore across the sky and a streak of earthen yellow light slammed down onto the plaza, stirring a wave of qi. The figure who emerged was Xuanzi. He looked unkempt and reeked faintly of alcohol. His steps wavered, and his eyes had the muddiness of someone nursing a hangover. The group stepped forward and called out in unison, "Elder Xuan." Xuanzi squinted and scanned them. He didn't bother counting, waved a large hand, and slurred, "If everyone's here, let's hit the road." Before the sound had even faded, yellow light flashed around him, and he rose into the air, swaying as he flew toward the Stardew Great Forest. Xuanzi had been in a foul mood lately. Poison Immortal's recent growth had bruised his pride. Poison Immortal had once only been marginally stronger than Xuanzi. After gaining some opportunity, his strength had shot up, and on several encounters since the body sect relocated to Shrek City, Poison Immortal had completely dominated him. Xuanzi had been roughed up enough times to feel humiliated. Calculating how long it would take him to recover, he decided to lead this hunt himself, partly to clear his head, partly to find rare wild game to assuage his cravings. And with Zhang Lexuan in the team, he felt things would be under control. If anything went wrong, he could still step in. With that thought, he vanished into the horizon. Left standing, the group exchanged glances. The mood was awkward for a moment. Zhang Lexuan remained composed. She looked around and said clearly, "Everyone, depart on your own accord. Follow the plan and be extremely careful." They nodded, settled themselves, and under her lead, the dozen of them became streaks of light, heading for the Stardew Great Forest. Meanwhile, in Kong Ming'an's room at the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce headquarters, a different kind of scene unfolded. In the center of the room, a dark purple 10,000 souls banner fluttered as if in a windless current. Instead of vengeful souls wailing across its surface, countless silvery white filaments of light circulated and braided together like a galaxy. Each filament was a condensed stream of mental data. From their convergence, countless silvery threads extended and connected precisely to the first spirit ring floating beside Kong Ming'an, like neural pathways. This spirit ring was no longer its usual black. It glowed with an illusory silver sheen, braided from space and spiritual energy, tiny points of phosphorescence pulsing inside. Supported by spatial energy, pure mental force and data streams flowed through the ring, coalescing into flashes of light that projected a cold, rational aura. Kong Ming'an sat cross-legged with his eyes closed. Faint silvery light spilled from the corners of his eyes, the same color as the ring beside him. His usually gentle warmth was gone. In its place was a detached, almost clinical indifference, as if emotion had been stripped away to make room for raw reasoning. The Ice Empress stood guard nearby, perfectly still, golden eyes fixed on him. Her aura of extreme cold was contained, but ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice. Time passed quietly. Slowly, the silvery light that had spilled from Kong Ming'an's eyes faded, and the impassive expression eased. He opened his eyes. They were clear again, though a hint of tiredness lingered. Underneath it all, the bright excitement of success. The Ice Empress exhaled in relief. When Kong Ming'an got an idea, he never listened to anyone. His soul aura flickering on and off had made her fear he was risking his life. At least, she thought, nothing had gone wrong. She folded her arms and said in a cool voice, "Did you succeed?" "Yes, extremely successful." Kong Ming'an smiled and turned to look at her. "Want to try it?" The Ice Empress arched an eyebrow, curiosity flickering across her face as she leaned closer to the silvery ring. "Try it?" Kong Ming'an nodded and held out his hand. The Ice Empress placed her palm into his. The motion was practiced, without hesitation, clearly not the first time. She felt a warm current from his palm, then the subtle spread of his mental force reaching into her sea of consciousness. She lowered her defenses and let the familiar current guide her awareness. Something new seemed to appear in her sea of consciousness, and a voice, neither clearly male nor female, with an odd, textured timbre, spoke directly to her mind. "Lingshu Protocol is now online. Esteemed Lady Ice Empress, do you wish to sign the contract and connect to the Lingshu network?" The sudden voice startled her, and she instinctively tensed before calming. A set of neatly arranged, faintly glowing text options had appeared in her field of vision below the voice. She blinked her golden eyes and looked at Kong Ming'an, silent and waiting. Chapter 106, Spiritual Pivot, Lingshu Network, Soul Computational Unit. "Interesting, my foot." The Ice Empress looked ready to bite, but she didn't strike. She only asked, "So how exactly do I use this thing? Do I have to sign this contract?" "Don't worry, sign it," Kong Ming'an said with a smile. "I wouldn't trick you with something like this." "Humph, who knows what evil schemes you're cooking up this time," she snapped. Still, her thoughts obediently followed his words and made a choice. Sign. A neutral mechanical voice entered her mind a moment later. Contract signed. User, Ice Empress, authority rank sub-creator. Identity confirmed. Welcome to the Lingshu Protocol. After the voice faded, the text interface paused for a second or two. Then the voice spoke again. Successfully connected to the Lingshu network. Lingshu Network User Guide V1.0 has been sent to your personal inbox. Please review it and explore the functions of the Lingshu network. Please read the Lingshu Network User Guide V1.0 carefully and strictly adhere to the rules. We wish you a pleasant user experience. As the announcements ended, the complex interface before the Ice Empress simplified and converged until only 4 small characters remained, like a signature: Lingshu Protocol. Those characters disappeared, and a flood of information filled her mind. It was the Lingshu Network User Guide V1.0. The Ice Empress, whose mental strength was already formidable, absorbed it quickly. After a short pause, she tested the system, sending a mental command to the protocol. Command accepted. User attempts to access data. Star Ring, God Ascension Staircase. Authorizing, U-rank subcreator. Access granted. Immediately, countless pieces of data about the Star Ring, God Ascension Staircase arranged themselves in her thoughts. Kong Ming'an had explained some of this before, but now it appeared clearly in text form. She tried another command, checking other things she remembered him explaining, and each time the data surfaced for her to browse. Her eyes cleared as the newly available knowledge settled in. Unconsciously, she turned to him and asked, "What exactly is this?" "It's the Lingshu Protocol," Kong Ming'an said, smiling faintly. The Ice Empress looked puzzled, so he patiently explained the device he'd spent 2 months creating. "First, this came from an inspiration a few months back. I finally realized it, the spiritual pivot." He pointed to the silver spirit ring beside him. "At its core, it's an information processing hub built from a seed of my naturally dissipated soul fragments. With my first spirit ring, the one from a thorny dragon that contains spatial elements, serving as the main engine. Everyone knew a spirit master's spirit ring had malleability and could be edited. What he had done was transform that spirit ring from a simple emitter, a device that only activated fixed soul skill modules to cast spirit abilities, into a computing platform with complex interfaces for receiving, storing, and processing information. He called it the spiritual pivot. The spiritual pivot isn't meant to think for me. It's a foundational architecture, a service layer for all information processing, Kong Ming'an continued. I've built a large number of independent information processing threads inside it. More accurately, you could call them soul threads. Each thread connects to and drives a soul computational unit through spiritual probing, and each soul computational unit provides computational power for me. His gaze shifted to the dark purple Myriad Souls banner beside him. The soul computational units were in fact the more than 300 evil soul master souls he'd specially purified within the banner, stripped of self-awareness and left with only basic logical computing capabilities. He had personally converted them into soul computational units, the cornerstone of the Ling Shu network. And the Ling Shu network you just joined is the user interface built on spiritual probing and the spiritual pivot. It offers lots of functions. At his thought, a fuller interface appeared in the Ice Empress's mind, with options like user info, personal mailbox, contacts, database, and history. He took her hand and with her finger pointed to contacts. For example, besides browsing the data I've uploaded, you can contact me at any time through the Ling Shu network. Of course, this only works within the network's coverage area, including all the other functions I mentioned. Kong Ming'an explained patiently. The Ling Shu network was a network he had built using memories of networks from his previous life, combined with the spiritual pivot and numerous soul computational units. At present, it was essentially a small local network, functionally limited, able only to share and transmit information between him and a few people nearby. It was, in a sense, a toy. But there was huge room to expand. To improve it, he'd only need more and higher quality soul computational units, and the carrying capacity of the spiritual pivot spirit ring, the main engine, would need to be increased. Capturing more evil soul masters later to create more computational units was simple enough. Remember the soul capture tool I used to strip remnant soul fragments of spirit beasts from spirit rings? He asked. If I spread the spell cultivator system, then the spirit rings of spell cultivators ought not to contain remnant spirit beast souls. Becoming a spell cultivator will require stripping those remnant souls, and those stripped fragments can be repurposed as soul computational units. He smiled. Those remnant spirit beast souls, lacking even consciousness, might be only 1/10 or 1/20th the size of a full evil soul master soul in terms of volume, but there were countless spirit masters. It would be easy to collect large numbers of those remnants, more than enough for the network's early stages. And later, his target would be all spirit masters. Chapter 107, the demi-plane transformation of the spirit ring and the so-called Ling Shu protocol. In Kong Ming'an's mind, the future Ling Shu network would be like the networks he knew in his previous life, everywhere, touching every spirit master, eventually woven into the daily lives of all living beings. And during that process, it would collect a tiny, almost negligible fee. Why shouldn't it? The fee would have two parts, a trace amount of spirit power to keep the network running, and a sliver of each user's soul computing capacity. The first would be a more efficient, stealthy, and sustainable way to gather energy than hawking or customizing artificial spirit rings. If someone uses the Ling Shu network constantly, it's almost like they are continuously channeling spirit power into him. Once cultivation is popularized among the populace and the Ling Shu network blankets the entire Doluo plane, it would be as if the whole plane was continuously feeding him power. Collecting the strength of the masses to rapidly amass energy, this suited his path better. In a way, it resembled the old method of rising to divinity by harvesting faith. The first sea god gathered faith to attain divinity. Kong Ming'an would use the spirit pivot to build a network, harvesting spirit power to condense a star ring. Different methods, same aim, harnessing the power of living beings. The soul computing power units he planned to use were even more directly analogous. No spirit master, or living being, uses 100% of their soul's computing power, a lot of it sits idle. This was the weak point he intended to exploit. Every user connected to the Lingshu network would shoulder the burden of maintaining their link. The load would be tiny, maybe 1% or less of their soul computing capacity. On top of that, he could legally, feasibly take another small portion, say an additional 1% of idle power. Pooled together, these distributed soul computing power units would form a vast computing grid, assisting him with deductions and calculations far beyond any one mind. That would let him automate tedious logical work and free his mind for higher-level strategy. At the same time, every connected user would function as a tiny signal base station. The faint ripples of their minds, like stones tossed into a lake, would strengthen and expand the Lingshu network's coverage and signal. His plan was clear. First, finish internal testing and optimization of the existing Lingshu network. Once stable, bundle it with the artificial spirit ring system and introduce it to the market gradually. Packaging and promotion could be left to Ju Zi. She was the expert there. But before a public rollout, he had to solve the Spirit Pivot's capacity limit. Right now, the Spirit Pivot, the spirit ring that operates as the network's main node, had an upper limit roughly equal to carrying 1,000 standard soul computing power units. Nearly a third of that capacity was already in use. That might be plenty for his own auxiliary research, but if the network ever needed to support a city or the entire plane, that capacity was laughably small. He needed either a much more powerful carrier or to perform deeper modifications on the Spirit Pivot itself. When he first modified the Spirit Pivot, he had already used some demi-plane construction techniques taught by Electrolux, plus spatial expansion principles from high-tier storage spirit tools. That had boosted its carrying capacity considerably. To go further, he would need to enhance its internal spatial stability and information-carrying performance and add more soul thread interfaces. Essentially, he was trying to virtualize a demiplane specifically for his Spirit Pivot. Elder Yi's demiplane had carried an army of the dead. Kong Ming'an's demiplane would be the core host for soul threads, processing vast amounts of information and acting as the beating heart of the Lingshu network. It was a promising new direction. The problem was that the Spirit Pivot was his own spirit ring. Turning his own ring into a demiplane, he didn't know exactly what it would become. He only knew it would be interesting. For now, this initial Spirit Pivot was sufficient for personal use. Large-scale distribution could be phased in slowly. Besides, scaling up would require rewriting the Lingshu protocol anyway. The Lingshu protocol, the low-level rule and logic system that governs the Spirit Pivot, the soul computing power units, and the entire Lingshu network, had cost him a tremendous amount of mental effort. He had spent 2 months in research, 10 days to finish the Spirit Pivot, the soul computing power unit, and the network's framework, and the rest of the time to perfect the Lingshu protocol itself. And the results were worth it. The protocol could assist with extremely complex deductions and calculations. He gave it a problem or a direction. The Lingshu protocol distributed the work through the Spirit Pivot to the soul computing power units, and the units processed and returned the aggregated results to him. It could essentially run on autopilot. Of course, building that drove his brain to the limit. He wasn't eager to tinker with it more for the time being. It was running, so he'd test the functions and leave any major rewrites for later. While writing the Lingshu protocol, he had even coded a few small games, Tetris and Spider Solitaire, and embedded them in the network as a break from the mental strain. Right now, the Ice Empress was sitting very close to him, connected to the Lingshu network and idly playing those games. Technically, she was helping test network stability, so Kong Ming'an smiled and didn't disturb her. He cleared his mind of distractions and called softly in his heart, "Spirit Pivot. I am here, Creator. Check the deduction progress on important matters. Matter 1, Star Ring, Universal Method. Computing power occupancy, 50%. Deduction progress, 3.62%. Estimated completion time, 6 months, 6 days. Body Cultivator, Chi and Blood Soul Ring. Computing power occupancy, 25%. Deduction progress, 6.7 completion time, 1 month, 4 days. Matter 3, Spirit Beast, Universal Form Transformation Art. Computing power occupancy, 25%. Deduction progress 16.66%. Estimated completion time 21 days. A satisfied expression crossed Kong Ming'an's face. There was a certain pleasure in sitting back and waiting for the harvest. 108. Attacked by a 100,000-year-old soul beast. Being able to achieve such passive gains already proved that his past 2 months had not been wasted. From now on, he could devote the vast majority of his energy to improving the Lingshu protocol. The initial implementation had already sped up how quickly he could clear a backlog of matters, and as the network and computing power expanded, the efficiency gains would be immeasurable. More importantly, this assisted thinking system wasn't exclusive to him. Once it matured, core members like Elder Yi and his grandfather, Kong Deming, could all access it. The research capabilities of the entire team would grow exponentially. It was a genuinely revolutionary tool, one that could bring a qualitative change in productivity. Kong Ming'an thought for a moment and began drafting a proposal, deciding to first introduce the Lingshu network to the core members of the Mingmeng Chamber of Commerce. Even putting everything else aside, the ability to use the Lingshu network for rapid communication alone would dramatically increase the chamber's efficiency. Foundational infrastructure like network information bases would also be necessary. Set a small first goal. Cover the entire capital city and Shrek City. Kong Ming'an threw himself wholeheartedly into the work. Time slipped by silently. More than 10 days passed with him completely absorbed. Deep in the mixed zone of the Stardew Great Forest, things were not going well. "These moon-eating silver wolves are hunting us," a spirit emperor shouted, his spirit manifesting as he slammed his fist and shoved a pouncing wolf away. Urgency saturated the 12-person spirit hunting team that just moments before had been full of confidence. Everything had happened too quickly. They had just downed a 30,000-year spirit beast, enough for the team's newly minted spirit king at rank 60 to absorb, when they suddenly found themselves surrounded by a pack of moon-eating silver wolves. The 12 assumed defensive stances and scanned the surrounding woods. Pairs of eerie green eyes glowed like ghost fire in the darkness, increasing in number until they totaled well over 100. The wolves moved with swift, unnervingly coordinated precision, compressing the team's living space and closing a tight encirclement. Then, at a coordinated instant, they pounced. "Mystic Turtle True Body," shouted a spirit saint named Shishan. The massive golden mystic turtle phantom behind him solidified, and a heavy, earthy yellow barrier expanded instantly, cutting off the wolves' frenzied charges. But he was only one man. The earth-toned barrier trembled under constant clawing and nearly collapsed. Gaps tore open, and several wolves slipped through. Other teammates rushed to meet them, quickly slaying the intruders, but the attacks were relentless. Why are packs of moon-eating silver wolves appearing in the mixed zone? Aren't they supposed to be active in the core zone? The team's only support system, Spirit King, demanded, continuing to cast her healing and support abilities across the increasingly wounded group. There were just too many wolves. Her boosts could not instantly turn the tide. "Where is Elder Xuan? Where's the team leader?" someone asked desperately. The super duo assigned to protect them was nowhere to be seen. Could he really be this unreliable? Chaos and suppression spread, and morale sagged beneath the wolves' organized, repeated assaults. At that moment, a powerful aura rose with a firm voice that cut through the confusion. "Shishan, hold the defense and focus on the left pack. Li Yue, use your vines to entangle the one that slipped in on the right. Prioritize healing for the front line. The wounded must retreat to the center of the circle." Zhang Lexuan stepped forward. Moonlight-like spirit power surged from her. Her gaze was sharp as she took command. Her clear, decisive orders and the weight of her aura gave the panicked teammates a focal point, and they instinctively followed. Moonrise, a vast silver moon phantom solidified behind her, and countless moon blades condensed like living steel, their strikes sounding like a reversing river of stars. They slammed into the pack's weakest point. With tearing sounds, many moon-eating silver wolves were cleaved in half, blood and fur flying. The attack tore a hole in the airtight encirclement. "Zhao Ming, take the others and leave now," she commanded. Zhao Ming didn't hesitate. His martial soul true body materialized, a magnificent azure giant falcon. Its sharp talons scooped up 3 severely injured teammates. The others clung to its legs and back. The falcon cried out, beat its great wings, and streaked into the sky through the gap Zhang Lexuan had opened. They forced their way out of the wolves' ring. Relief barely had time to surface when something huge and silver flashed from the shadows. The size and presence of it instantly drew every eye. A giant wolf, far larger than its pack, stepped into view. Its fur flowed like moonlight. A crescent-shaped tuft of silver hair crowned its forehead, and a terrifying aura made one's soul tremble. 100,000-year-old soul beast, the moon-eating silver wolf king. It stared fixedly at the azure falcon soaring above, then lashed its tail. A massive crescent moon of spirit power hurtled outward. Tear! Like cloth being ripped apart, the crescent slashed through the azure streak. With a miserable shriek, Zhao Ming's martial soul true body was sheared in two. The falcon's broken body and the terrified teammates fell from the sky like dumplings, smashing into the ground and throwing up a cloud of dust. Zhang Lexuan felt dazed from the impact. She propped herself up, but blood blurred her vision. The first thing she saw was Zhao Ming's body not far off. Only half of it remained, still twitching faintly. The upper half lay a little farther away. His eyes were already vacant. She staggered to her feet and took in the carnage. Severed limbs littered the clearing. Teammates groaned in pain, and other figures were being pounced on and torn apart by the opportunistic wolves. Her mind went numb for a beat. Then she saw Lin Lin, the support system spirit king, being lunged at by one of the wolves. "Watch out!" Zhang Lexuan cried, instinctively channeling spirit power. A moonblade shot forth and aimed to intercept. The Wolf King, which had been watching coldly from the side, merely turned its gaze. Before Zhang Lexuan's blade could strike, an invisible mental shockwave slammed into her. Bang! Under her eyes, a blossom of blood erupted on Lin Lin's chest. In an instant, half of the girl's body was a ruin of gore. The light in her eyes snuffed out like a candle in the wind, and her body collapsed limply. I know I've been writing too much about theory lately, but I, the lazy author, promise the rest will focus mainly on plot. Zhang Lexuan's pupils trembled, but before she could gather her thoughts, a shrill scream cut through the air. Not far away, a teammate was surrounded by several moon-eating silver wolves, their howls of agony unending. Zhang Lexuan stared, blank and numb, as a wave of hopelessness rose inside her. At that moment, the moon-eating silver wolf king lifted its head and unleashed a long howl filled with crushing mental pressure. The force struck Zhang Lexuan's mind like a sledgehammer. Sealed memories burst open all at once. She saw that night, the towering flames, her parents' desperate, pained faces, images colliding and overlapping with the hellish scene around her. Rage swelled in her chest like a volcano, ready to erupt. With her cultivation, she should have resisted the mental onslaught, but something even stronger than the anger, the torrent of emotions she had buried over the years, surged up. The alienation and accusations from her inner courtyard peers, the shock and hurt when she learned the Academy's dark side, the impotence of wanting to change things but meeting fierce resistance, the suffocating weight of everyone's expectations. It was like dynamite igniting, shattering the last support in her heart. She was powerless. She had been unable to protect her parents. She had been unable to change the Academy. Now she couldn't even protect her teammates. She couldn't do anything. Complete despair rolled over her like a cold tide, drowning her consciousness and stripping away all strength. Tears slipped over dusty, blood-stained cheeks and fell to the ground. Always helpless. Who can save me? A playful, almost imperious glint shone in the moon-eating silver wolf king's intelligent, human-like eyes as it fixed its gaze on the human whose aura was strongest but whose will it had broken. It no longer hesitated. Its massive body became a silver streak of lightning, its claws aimed straight for Zhang Lexuan's head. The shadow of death descended. Zhang Lexuan watched the claws fill her vision. Her body froze, unable even to make the smallest dodge, as if transported back to that powerless childhood night. She stood rooted, resigned. Then a calm, gentle voice whispered in her ear. Already giving up? Her crumbling consciousness sharpened. She turned her head and saw a slender young man who had appeared without her noticing. A faint silver light flowed around him. His handsome face matched the young man from the memory of the competition. In an instant, she recognized him. Kong Ming'an. Kong's gaze was steady, and he didn't look directly at her. He raised his hand and an ice sword, condensed from extreme ice and snow, materialized. He thrust it forward. The moon-eating silver wolf king's claws, strong enough to shred metal, struck the sword with a metallic clang and were stopped. Frigid cold, as if it could freeze the soul, radiated from the blade and instantly coated the beast, turning it into a towering ice sculpture. For a moment, the world held its breath. Kong Ming'an turned to Zhang Lexuan, who still seemed dazed, and raised an eyebrow. There was the faintest trace of exasperation in his calm voice. "Didn't I tell you if you called me I'd come? Why didn't you call?" He was a useful link in the plan to infiltrate Shrek. He didn't want Zhang Lexuan to die. She was a sunk cost he wasn't willing to lose. Zhang Lexuan blinked. The young man's figure was reflected in her eyes and her pupils trembled. She tried to speak, but her throat felt blocked. She could only part her lips. Kong didn't wait for an answer. The ice encasing the Wolf King began to spiderweb with cracks. The beast was about to break free. 100,000-year soul beast, he murmured. He was an incarnation of energy, projected remotely, and lacked some power, easy to bully weaker spirit beasts. But a true 100,000-year soul beast was a different matter. A hint of annoyance crossed his face, but also curiosity. The material would be valuable for an experiment. Then he turned back to Zhang Lexuan and reached out. His voice was firm and unquestionable, as if issuing an order. "Give me your hand." Zhang Lexuan hesitated, but something snapped inside her, an instinct to grasp at anything. She placed her blood-streaked hand in his slender, jointed palm. In the next instant, a vast, gentle spirit current and a boundless mental force, like a sea, surged through her and intertwined with her own spirit and mind. It flowed into her, resonating and merging. Is this spirit fusion? Zhang Lexuan realized, dimly. A voice, his voice, then sounded directly inside her mind. "Don't resist. Leave everything to me." His tone allowed no refusal, but she felt no objection. Her spirit and body offered no resistance. Before her conscious mind could decide, she surrendered, instinctively letting go of every defense and yielding complete control. She yearned, without quite knowing why. She wanted someone to take over the things she dared not or could not do. She wanted someone to decide so she could act without drowning in uncertainty. She yearned to be dominated. Her consciousness became an observer. Under that detached witness, Zhang Lexuan rose to her feet. The tearful despair in her eyes vanished and was replaced by an absolute calm indifference. A silver-white stream of data flashed through her irises and then was gone. Her wobbly posture steadied. The aura was still Zhang Lexuan's, but the core within was different. "My chest feels so heavy," Kong Ming'an said, unable to help but complain. To handle what came next, he had chosen to use Zhang Lexuan's body, though he was still a little awkward in it. Because her consciousness offered no resistance and even welcomed him, he adapted quickly. He inclined his head slightly and asked softly, to whatever system resided in the body, "Spirit pivot, how much spirit power does this body have left?" "Spirit power remaining, 68%, creator," came a reassuring, mechanical response from the sea of his mind. "That's enough," Kong said. His gaze shifted back to the frozen moon-eating silver wolf king. Regret flickered across his face. Its material would be difficult to retrieve. But another emotion, eagerness to experiment, shone through. A moment later, Kong Ming'an slowly raised his hand. 110. Kill, loss, and anger. Spiritual probing spread over the clearing like an invisible domain, instantly mapping every moon-eating silver wolf corpse and every surviving team member. Kong Ming'an had broadcast his probing the moment he arrived, flooding the area with false signals to smash the wolves' mental force while keeping the survivors' minds blank. It was a necessary sweep to prevent interference. When he confirmed that no one could perceive him, Kong Ming'an began to draw every scrap of spirit power from his body into a single, frantically bright point at his fingertip. It was not an ordinary orb of power, but a wildly spinning, collapsing knot of force. The kind of ferocious condensation that looked almost like a soul core forming. The surrounding heaven and earth chi was ripped and swallowed into it. Under Kong Ming'an's control, however, it did not spin out of control. At last, the mass hardened into a silver needle, thinner than a hair, as solid as metal, glowing with a cold lunar light. At that instant, The moon-eating silver wolf king shattered the ice, encasing its body with a thunderous roar, trying to lunge again. The silver needle at Kong Ming'an's fingertip vanished. It did not fly. It slipped through space, reappearing without a sound, lodged dead center in the wolf king's brow. The wolf's charge stopped. For the first time, there was pure terror in its fierce eyes. It hurled all its spirit power at the point between its eyes, trying to forge the strongest defense, but the needle began to tear and swallow that force instead. It was as if the beast had simultaneously triggered a second soul core. Panic seized it. The sudden birth of another core shattered the balance of spirit power within its body. All its mental force surged toward the new formation, while its original soul core reacted to the disturbance. The two forces fought over the wolf's body. Loss of control spread through it. If a spirit beast's second soul core went awry, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Snow Empress had attempted the same with 600,000 years of cultivation and failed, suffering grievous damage to her origin. A 100,000-year soul beast with a recent breakthrough fared worse. A faint pop came from the wolf's brow, and then, boom, the massive head exploded like an overripe gourd. The headless body stood rigid for a heartbeat before collapsing, choking the clearing with dust. From the corpse, a dazzling blood-red spirit ring rose and hovered. For Kong Ming'an, there were only two outcomes in battle. Nothing could stop him, or he utterly crushed his foe. This 100,000-year soul beast belonged to the latter. He watched the remaining wolves panic at their leader's death and scatter into the forest. He did not pursue them. Instead, he strode to the spirit ring and drew it in. The ring's immense power poured into him. Kong Ming'an split and guided a portion of that surging energy into countless fine threads, connecting them to the gravely wounded team members lying around. He summoned spirit energy at his fingertips, tracing out a soul skill module. The door to his demi-plane opened. From within came rich, tangible life energy, which he poured into each body. Then he produced stalks of blue-silver immortal herb, faintly blue-silver, placing them into the mouths of the survivors. Among the 12-person team, 4 had already signed contracts with the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce, seeds he had planted. One of those had already died, but the others he could and would save. Perhaps they would be useful in the future. Time passed in silence. When Zhang Lexuan finally opened her eyes, clarity and consciousness returned. The collected, unruffled calm that had characterized her under Kong Ming'an's control was gone. He had left. The realization hit her like a physical ache, and a bewildered sense of loss washed over her. Something else stirred, and she raised her hand. A blood-red, 100,000-year spirit ring pulsed into being beside her, proof that she had advanced to spirit duo. A weak, relieved voice came from nearby. "Sister Lexuan, you managed to absorb it?" Most of the team had come around and gathered a short distance away. They were battered and wrapped in makeshift bandages, their auras thin but alive. Zhang Lexuan pushed herself up and asked urgently, "How is everyone?" The girl who had spoken blinked rapidly. Her voice trembled with gratitude and grief. "Thanks to you. At that critical moment, you killed the Wolf King, but Sister Lin Lin and Senior Brother Zhao Ming, She could not finish. Her gaze slid to the side. Zhang Lexuan followed it. 2 bodies lay covered by hastily acquired white cloths. Zhao Ming, Lin Lin. Her eyes went blank for a second. Waves of sorrow and guilt crashed through her. "It's not your fault, Sister Lexuan," the girl hurriedly said, forcing comfort. "If you hadn't killed that 100,000-year spirit beast at the end, we might all be dead. If you ask me, it's that old geezer's fault." Shishan, a nearby spirit saint who had managed to sit up, said, his face ashen with anger. "Our team leader, where was he when we needed him? He promised to protect us." "Exactly. It's his responsibility. He doesn't deserve to be a teacher." The survivors' resentment coalesced into a single target. Academy rules were clear. In a soul hunt emergency, the team leader or instructor must step in to protect the students. That guarantee was why they dared enter the mixed zone of the Stardew Great Forest. If their protector abandoned them at the crucial moment, what had they been risking everything for? A yellowish streak of light arrived on the horizon, slow and late, carrying the sharp tang of alcohol. Swansea swayed as he descended, looking dazed. Seeing the carnage and the bandaged, injured students, his pupils tightened and he demanded, somewhat unsteadily, "What exactly happened? How did it end up like this?" Every surviving pair of eyes turned to him, hollow with silent accusation and barely restrained fury. Zhang Lexuan rose slowly. She wiped the blood and tears from her face. The gentle tolerance that usually softened her gaze had been replaced by a cold resolve. Her look was a blade aimed straight at Xuanzi. Her voice was low but edged with fury. "Yes, Elder Xuan, what exactly happened? Where did you go?" Chapter 111. Muenzi, come here and kneel. I have something to say. Inside the laboratory at the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce headquarters, Kong Ming'an slowly opened his eyes. The faint glow that had accompanied his projection of consciousness across space faded away. The Ice Empress, who had been keeping watch, leaned in, her delicate face close and a hint of curiosity in her expression. "What were you doing just now?" she asked. She had seen him abruptly stop his experiment, press his hand to his glabella, open a spatial gate, toss something out, and then sit with his eyes closed. For a moment, she had feared the worst. After a beat, she added, "If something had happened to you, I wouldn't know how to explain it to the Snow Empress." Kong Ming'an listened to her awkward concern, shook his head slightly, and replied calmly, "Nothing happened. I just handled some urgent matters remotely. It's all resolved now." The Ice Empress watched him for a moment, confirming his breathing was steady and his spirit power calm. Her curiosity faded. Pouting, she settled back and leaned against him, seeking a comfortable position. With her toes curled up lazily, she connected her consciousness to the Ling Shu network. Distracted by the little games he had built into it, she scrolled through the latest recorded stories and the novels Kong Ming'an had uploaded for her. Small distractions so she wouldn't have to flip through thick books. Feeling the warmth and weight beside him, Kong Ming'an glanced at her and couldn't help thinking she was turning into a shut-in. He suppressed the thought, sighed softly, and with a sliver of his mind checked on Zhang Lexuan through the mark he'd left when they had used their spirit fusion earlier. He felt the turmoil inside Zhang Lexuan and worried. He hoped she could get through this. She was still the best candidate by far. If she couldn't, someone else would have to be found. Shrek Academy, Inner Court Medical Zone. Zhang Lexuan had not erupted into an outright confrontation with Xuanzi at the scene. Her reason had prevailed over a surge of anger. The survivors were badly hurt. Although Zhang Lexuan had performed emergency treatment with her own hands, it had only been enough to keep them alive. Several were still critically injured and unconscious. Those who were awake were wounded. There was no time for argument. So she stifled her grief and the need to demand answers, organized those who could still move to carry the injured and their fallen comrades, and returned to the academy for treatment. After they received care, the news of the spirit hunting operations spread quickly through the academy's leadership. Yan Xiaojie, the dean of the spirit department, was the first to arrive at the treatment site. Surveying the injured, his first reaction wasn't compassion, but a deep frown. He asked whether the incident had been contained, then instructed his assistant to investigate the family backgrounds of the two deceased students, calculating what trouble might arise. Zhang Lexuan saw all of it. She said nothing. Her usually gentle eyes had gone cold. Without a confrontation, she turned and flew straight for Sea God Island. A few hours later, a message reached every senior official at Shrek. A mandatory Sea God Pavilion meeting had been called by Ming'an. The heavy door closed slowly, shutting out the warm light that filtered through the golden ancient tree outside. Inside the Sea God Pavilion, the air felt thick and suffocating. One by one, the elders, normally unseen, filed in. Most remained silent, casting subtle glances at Ming'an, who sat at the head of the table, expression unreadable. Zhang Lexuan sat at his side. The atmosphere grew heavier. Yan Xiaojie entered with Kai Meimei, vice dean of the spirit department. When Yan saw Zhang Lexuan beside Ming'an, his face changed. He opened his mouth to explain, but a single look from Ming'an cut him off. "Stand aside," Ming'an said. His voice was soft, utterly controlled, no hint of emotion. Yan Xiaojie paled, fell silent, and obediently stepped back with his head bowed. Time passed until the last person arrived, Xuanzi. He carried a wine gourd, staggered in, the smell of alcohol about him, his expression dazed. Everyone's eyes turned to him. Ming'an's calm gaze struck him harder than the others. It cleared something in his face. Elder Mu. Mu'en raised a hand and interrupted him, voice flat and even. Xuanzi, come here and kneel. I have something to say. A cold sweat broke out on Xuanzi's brow. The tone reminded him of the decisive dragon god Duluo of his youth. His body trembled. Resistance was out of the question. Under the weight of all those gazes, he shuffled forward and fell to his knees with a thud. The sea god pavilion fell into a deadly silence. In that stillness, Mu'en turned his attention to Yan Xiaozhe. Xiaozhe, he said quietly, what were you thinking, sending 2 spirit Duluo to the homes of those 2 deceased children? Yan Xiaozhe's pupils constricted. He went ashen, lips trembling, but no sound came out. Mu'en sighed, asked no more questions, and raised his hand a fraction. An invisible, immense force slammed into Yan Xiaozhe. He flew backward, as if struck by a cannonball, and crashed against the wall. The sickening crack of bones breaking echoed through the hall. The wall did not collapse. Mu'en had deliberately spared the structure. But Yan Xiaozhe was splattered with blood, his bones fractured in multiple places. He slid down to the floor, groaning in pain. The expressions of every elder changed at once, their looks toward Mu'en filled with a sudden, visceral dread. The dragon god Duluo, who had been recuperating and rarely intervened since his breakthrough to limit Duluo, seemed to unveil his razor edge again in that instant. Fear snapped through the room like cold steel. Yet Mu'en himself showed no outward sign of change. His hunched form remained unchanged as he turned his cloudy gaze away from Yan Xiaozhe and back to Xuanzi, who knelt nearby. Xuanzi, he asked quietly, what were you doing when the team was surrounded by that pack of moon-eating silver wolves? Xuanzi trembled, cold sweat soaking his back. What could he possibly say? That he'd found a rare 9-colored brocade chicken deep in the Star-Dew Great Forest and was plucking it for a feast? He opened his mouth and it closed without a sound. Mu'en's eyes went colder. Then a senior elder forced himself forward and bowed slightly. Elder Mu, perhaps Elder Xuan cannot be entirely blamed. The appearance of a 100,000-year soul beast in the mixed zone of the Stardo Great Forest was an accident. No one could have foreseen it. This elder was not blind to the politics. Everyone knew Mu'en's lifespan was limited. That fact was no secret among Shrek's senior ranks. From his point of view, the next successor after the coming change might be Zhang Lexuan, but the Sea God Pavilion master immediately following would likely be Xuanzi. No matter how much Mu'en disapproved of Xuanzi, he could not be expected to kill him outright, only to punish. Standing beside Xuanzi now was the safe, politically correct choice. Once this elder took the lead, others quickly chimed in. Yes, Elder Mu. Elder Xuan's spirit is the gluttonous divine ox. He needs vast amounts of food to sustain it. What happened could have been caused by that, not intentional negligence. Elder Mu. Elder Xuan is a pillar of Shrek. He can't be punished like this arbitrarily, and only 2 students died. If the academy compensates their families, this can be settled. The elders talked over one another, trying to paper over tragedy with reason and precedent. As they argued louder, the grisly image of Yan Xiaozhe, gravely wounded moments before, was pushed aside by their practiced self-preservation. Zhang Lexuan listened, watched, and felt the last faint light in her eyes go out. Their words, cold, evasive, treating human lives as inconvenient statistics, drove a knife into her. Only 2 students dead. What did they think a life was worth? A raw, furious grief rose in her throat. She began to step forward to challenge them when the air itself in the Sea God Pavilion rippled. A solid figure stepped through that tear in space, carrying 2 humanoid bodies, bloody, barely breathing, like discarded dogs. Someone gasped, "Poison Immortal?" Poison Immortal's gaze swept the hall with contempt. He looked at Yan Xiaozhe, still barely alive on the floor, then at Xuanzi kneeling nearby, and a wicked smile traced his lips. "Oh, everyone's here? Perfect." With his identity confirmed, the elders reacted as if faced with a sudden enemy. Spirit power rippled through them defensively. Xuanzi straightened and circulated his spirit instantly, trying to stand, only for Mu'en to speak without looking at the newcomer. "Xuanzi, did I tell you to stand? Keep kneeling." Xuanzi froze mid-motion. He opened his mouth to protest, but Mu'en's plain, sovereign gaze shut the protest down like a hand. He sank back to his knees, forced into silence. Poison Immortal raised an eyebrow at the display, then threw the 2 wounded men to the floor, and smiled openly, nodding toward Ming'an. Ming'an, these two are from your academy, right? One tried to threaten the family of a contracted employee of my Ming'an Chamber of Commerce. I ran into him and crippled him, and the other, he kicked the second half-dead figure, was just a freebie. Problem? Yan Xiaojie, struggling to lift his head, hissed, Poison Immortal, do you know where you are? This is the Sea God Pavilion. How dare you intrude? Poison Immortal scratched his ear lazily. Why not? Get your facts straight, kid. It was your team's leader who was a complete wreck, causing a promising hire whom my chamber favored to suffer a terrible loss. I came here to get justice. His gaze sharpened and cut across the elders like a blade. If I hadn't shown up, what would you have done? Let it drop. After all, to you, how can the deaths of 2 students weigh against the honor of a rank 98 superduo? Even if the whole team had died, you still wouldn't have touched Xuanzi. Am I wrong? The elders fell silent. The implication was plain. Ming'an's inaction made Poison Immortal's presence tacitly permissible. Otherwise, how could he have come here at all? Poison Immortal clicked his tongue, then laughed, savage and cold. Since 2 died, let's make this fair. A life for a life. Before the words had died, he reached out and seized the elder who had declared, only 2 students died. The man screamed. 8 spirit rings flared, his spirit power unleashed in desperation. But beneath the enormous dark green hand that had materialized out of thin air and gripped him, his efforts were like an ant trying to move a mountain. An overwhelming force dragged him into Poison Immortal's palm. Grasping the elder's skull with one hand, Poison Immortal did not deliver a swift end. He spoke slowly, his voice flat. One of the 2 children, his legs were torn off. You can experience that too. His other hand blurred and became a blade. He slashed through the elder's body at the waist. The pavilion filled with a guttural scream as the man howled, his agony raw and unfiltered. Poison Immortal watched without expression, patient as though waiting out a long, boring argument. For over 10 minutes, the elder thrashed and shouted, then gradually his cries faded. When the noise stopped, Poison Immortal lifted the man's head, pressed his 5 fingers, firm, unflinching. There was a wet, sickening sound, like crushing overripe fruit. Red and white matter splattered from his hand. He tossed the headless, half-severed body aside like refuse. The hall was plunged into a stunned silence, blood darkened the floor, and a cold, absolute message hung in the air. Ming'an remained still, his face unreadable, while the elders stared at the ruin of one of their own with the new terrible clarity of those who had seen the price of their compromises. The entire Sea God Pavilion had descended into chaos. The elders who had just spoken up in agreement were deathly pale and trembling. Some frantically looked to Ming'an for help, but Ming'an had already shut his eyes, slowly turning his wheelchair so his back faced everyone. Bastard! Xuanzi's eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with tears, his breath coming in ragged heaves. He couldn't hold himself any longer and let out a furious roar. The phantom of the Tao Ti Divine Ox reappeared behind him, ready to pounce on Poison Immortal. Slap, with a single crisp backhand. No flashy spirit techniques, just a blow infused with his chi, blood power, spirit power, mental force, and sheer will. Poison Immortal sent Xuanzi flying into the wall. Xuanzi spat blood, collapsing to the ground. Get lost. I'll settle your score later. Poison Immortal didn't even glance at Xuanzi again. His cold eyes swept the panicked elders. Who spoke first just now? Under the threat of death, all decorum evaporated. The elders, desperate to save themselves, began pointing fingers and shifting blame, a hideous spectacle of self-preservation. Zhang Lexuan watched the farce in silence. How much difference was there between a peak superduo who had brushed the outline of rank 99 and a handful of frightened elders, some not even titled duo? None, like stepping on insects. Poison Immortal turned to the elder who had initially pleaded for Xuanzi. The man was terrified and tried to run, but Poison Immortal's aura pinned him in a corner. No, you can't kill me. Didn't you say only one person was tied to your merchant association? Killing one is enough. Why kill me too? The elder babbled. Poison Immortal's mocking smile deepened. Oh, so the lives of your Shrek students mean less than the lives of my merchant association's people? Or are you saying it doesn't matter if Shrek's students die, as long as you don't? The elder fell silent. Poison Immortal stopped wasting words, stepped forward and gripped his head like a chick. He tightened little by little, slowly crushing the skull. The screams were endless but useless. Moments later came a sickening crack. Another headless corpse collapsed to the floor. Blood filled the air, thick and metallic. The remaining elders were frozen, as silent as cicadas in winter, not daring to breathe. Poison Immortal shook the blood from his hands with spirit power, then walked back to the dazed Xuanzi. "For Mu'en's sake, I won't kill you today," he said in a deceptively calm voice. Then it rose, cold and hard. But avoiding death doesn't mean escaping punishment. He hoisted Xuanzi by the throat like a broken sack and slammed him down. His fist, bristling with terrifying qi and blood power, hammered Xuanzi's head and face over and over, each blow a pile driver. Bang! 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 The dull thuds echoed through the pavilion, mixed with suppressed groans and the sound of bones cracking. Xuanzi's martial soul true body shattered the moment it condensed beneath Poison Immortal's casual strikes. He was a human sandbag, beaten with enough force to not kill him outright. After half an hour, Poison Immortal finally stopped. Mu'en still faced away, eyes closed and silent. No one else dared move. Poison Immortal picked up Xuanzi, no longer recognizable as human, and addressed Mu'en's back. "Mu'en, I'm taking him. I'll make him kneel and kowtow in apology to the families of those 2 dead students and to the injured students, one by one. I'll bring him back in a few days." Mu'en opened his eyes slowly but did not turn around. "He must not die," he said quietly. "Don't worry, he won't die." Poison Immortal grinned, stepped into the spatial ripple beside him with Xuanzi slung over his shoulder, and vanished. The Sea God Pavilion was left with the heavy stench of blood and an oppressive silence. After a long moment, Mu'en turned his wheelchair to face everyone. His cloudy eyes scanned the shaken faces of the surviving elders, then settled on Zhang Lexuan, who had been standing quietly to the side. Lexuan stepped forward. Zhang Lexuan hesitated only briefly and then moved to Mu'en's side. Mu'en's gaze swept the hall once more. He spoke slowly and deliberately, each word measured. "I hereby announce that Zhang Lexuan shall become the preparatory pavilion master of the Sea God Pavilion." He paused, his voice hardening into something final and unquestionable. "Starting today, she will assume full control of all my authority, managing every matter within the academy. When she reaches the rank of titled Du Luo, she will directly become the pavilion master of the Sea God Pavilion. Who agrees? Who opposes?" Everyone stared at the old man in the wheelchair in stunned disbelief, including Zhang Lexuan herself. Even the dullest among them realized a complete reshuffle of Shrek was underway. Mu'en had made his decision. Back at the Merchant Association headquarters, Kong Ming'an quietly admired the move. Mu'en had forced the issue into the open and ensured a decisive outcome. Having Yan Shaozhi severely punished, whether by Mu'en himself or at his command, served as both punishment and protection, preventing Yan Shaozhi from being beaten to death by Poison Immortal and reasserting Mu'en's authority. Using Poison Immortal to brutalize Xuanzi in front of everyone made Mu'en's stance unmistakable and reminded the Academy of the strength of their external enemies, which would help solidify internal unity. The 2 corrupt elders who had been exposed were conveniently eliminated by an outside hand, leaving no room for objection. And by elevating Zhang Lexuan, Mu'en had effectively guaranteed her path to the pavilion's leadership. The 100,000-year spirit ring from the moon-eating Silver Wolf King suited Zhang Lexuan perfectly, and with the dropped 100,000-year spirit bone, her potential had just taken another leap. If she reached rank 90 and hunted another 100,000-year soul beast, she could possess 200,000-year spirit rings and 2 such spirit bones. Her leap to rank 98 would be only a matter of time. A Zhang Lexuan strengthened in this way would be far more fit than Xuanzi to lead Shrek. Mu'en's life was limited. He was now dedicating his remaining years to nurturing her. Kong Ming'an allowed himself a small, anticipatory smile. Mu'en's plan was shrewd, the best outcome under the circumstances. The only question left was what Zhang Lexuan herself would think. 114. Zhang Lexuan, drunk and the drowning person's rope evening inside Shrek City. Deep in a narrow alley, a tavern sat in quiet contrast to the bustle of the main street. There were none of the noisy guessing games or loud arguments that filled the larger inns, Only the dim glow of spirit lamps and the sharp scent of wine mingled with a faint trace of tobacco. Most patrons drank alone or spoke in low voices. The whole place felt hushed. In the innermost corner, in an inconspicuous booth, Zhang Lexuan leaned back against the sofa by herself. She had clearly been there a long time. Several empty bottles littered the table. She wore a tailored dark dress that emphasized her tall, proud figure. Her long legs, sheathed in smooth black stockings, were crossed casually, catching the weak light. She tipped her head back on the cushion, cheeks flushed and unnatural red, eyes hazy and unfocused. The sharp, decisive look she usually carried as an inner court. Senior sister was gone, replaced by the soft lethargy of drink. Strands of dark hair clung damply to her temples, and the heat of the alcohol had loosened her collar, revealing fair throat and delicate collarbones. There was something decadent and dangerously alluring about her, an exhausted, tempting maturity that had let down all defenses. Unnoticed by most, a shadow moved and a figure slid quietly to her side. It was Kong Ming'an. He stared at the scattered bottles and at Zhang Lexuan, who idly swirled the amber liquor in her cup, and paused. Spirits aside, alcohol has little effect on a spirit master. Circulating spirit power can usually dispel it. Zhang Lexuan's state told him otherwise. She wanted to be drunk. As if she had sensed his approach, her lazy gaze focused and settled on him. A brief, wine-scented smile curved her lips. Her tone had the certainty of someone who had expected him. "You came, just as I thought." "You're drunk," Kong Ming'an said. Zhang Lexuan propped herself up and shook her head vigorously, trying to appear sober. Her body wavered and she nearly lost her balance. Drunk people always insist they aren't. Kong Ming'an thought so too, but he didn't stand aloof. He moved closer, sat, and steadied her. She turned her head toward him and pushed the glass, still half full, across the table, her eyes bright with a challenging, hazy light. "Want a drink?" Kong Ming'an arched an eyebrow. "What's this about?" Zhang Lexuan gave a hoarse chuckle. "Can't you handle it?" "I'm an adult," he replied. He knew reasoning with someone drunk was pointless, and that going along was easier. Calmly, he took the glass, tilted it, and let the liquor touch his lips. It burned, then left a sweet aftertaste as it slid down. He set the glass back down. In his former life, he'd often covered for troublesome juniors, so he could take his liquor. In this life, with so many pressing affairs and his position demanding restraint, he rarely drank. Tonight was the exception. Zhang Lexuan watched him closely, his lips as he sipped, the movement of his Adam's apple, the casual gap at his collar. Her eyes flickered with something darker. After a moment of silence, she suddenly spoke, voice low and stubborn despite the haze. "Was all of this arranged by you?" Kong Ming'an shook his head and answered plainly. "No, I left a mark on you after the last competition. If your life were endangered, that mark would activate so I could sense your location and intervene. I didn't know about your ambush beforehand. If you mean Poison Immortal's later appearance, that was my arrangement. It was the truth." His moves regarding Zhang Lexuan had been more opportunistic than obsessive, placing a piece on the board that might be useful without investing too much. He had too many weighty matters to devote himself completely to one person. Zhang Lexuan stared into his eyes for a few seconds, as if testing him, then let her gaze drop. The alcohol, mixed with the despair, indignation, and disillusionment piled up over recent days, finally breached the last of her defenses. She was done with Shrek. The Shrek she had believed in, the light, justice, warmth she'd built her life around, seemed utterly corrupted to its core. What had her perseverance, her sacrifices, even the infamous judgments she'd carried out, amounted to? After her family was destroyed and she was the sole survivor, she had been like a drowning person clinging to Shrek as a lifeline, the only thing that kept her alive. Now that rope was fraying, snapping inch by inch. She was drowning again. The faith she'd clung to had collapsed, leaving a cold void that made it hard to breathe. She needed to fill that void. She needed a new rope, something solid she could grab, or something that would bind her and never let go. She tightened her grip on the cold wine glass until her knuckles blanched. Then, abruptly, she turned and looked straight at Kong Ming'an. The next instant, she leaned into him. Her soft, perfume-tinged body rested against him. Her hands seized the lapels of his shirt like a drowning person clutching a lifeline. Kong Ming'an felt the warmth and softness against him, and a faint trembling that was almost imperceptible. He glanced down. Zhang Lexun looked up, her drunken eyes probing, but carrying a thin, stubborn yearning. Her voice trembled. "You want me, don't you?" Chapter 115, The Kiss and the Incompetent Ice Empress 2.0. Kong Ming'an paused. He couldn't help it. An inexplicable intuition told him Zhang Lexuan seemed very off just now, especially her tone. It made him uneasy. He neither pushed her away nor pulled back. He simply patted the hands that were clinging to his clothes, loosening her grip a little so she wouldn't tear his jacket. It wouldn't do to explain that to the Ice Empress later. Then he spoke frankly. "What I want is to control you," he admitted. "I want to use you to gradually take control of Shrek Academy. Rather than destroying it, I'd prefer to turn Shrek into a stable talent base for me." "Is that so?" Zhang Lexuan murmured softly, then, softer still, asked, "Then why me?" "Partly because your talent and abilities suit the job, and partly—" Kong Ming'an hesitated, looking down at her. "Because of your moon spirit and the sun-moon bloodline inside you. It's the same origin as mine. Even though the blood connection is more than 5 generations removed, you're still my clan sister. Choosing anyone else would be less ideal. I need you." All the other words fell away in her mind. Only his last 4, "I need you," echoed. Her hands, which had briefly loosened, clenched again as if seizing a life preserver. An expression she couldn't fully name lit her eyes. Buried in that light was a peculiar, almost pathological relief. A small, dawning sense of belonging that even Kong Ming'an failed to notice. Zhang Lexuan narrowed her wine-hazed eyes and a faint, unsettling smile curved her lips. "You need me now?" she repeated, solemn as if confirming something irrevocable. Kong Ming'an felt the oddness in her tone, but nodded anyway. "Yes." He paused, drew the contract from his mind, as if pulling it out of a pocket, and placed it on the table. The clauses had been drafted. He was about to explain when Zhang Lexuan's face suddenly filled his vision. Warmth pressed to his lips, wine and something sweet. Kong Ming'an's body stiffened, a flash of shock crossed his features. He tried to turn away reflexively, but she offered no escape. Her eyes were closed. Her hands, which had been clutching his clothes, now wrapped tightly around his neck. She clung as if it were the only rope keeping her from falling, stubborn and fierce, not letting him back away an inch. Then, awkward and determined, she parted his lips with her own. There was a faint sweetness, threaded with wine and the bitter tang of tears, mingling between them. Time stretched. After a long moment, she was the first to break away. Zhang Lexuan rested her forehead against his chest, head bowed, breathing hard, gasping for air as if she'd been holding it too long. Her chest heaved, a little dizzy. Kong Ming'an looked down at her, at the inexplicable stubbornness in her eyes, and asked in a low voice, "Why?" She laughed foolishly, still trying to catch her breath, then lifted her head. Wine blurred her vision. Obsession sharpened it. "Isn't this what you wanted?" Before he could answer, she leaned in again, cutting him off entirely. This time he did not pull away. He slid an arm around her waist and leaned back against the sofa. A subtle spatial ripple shimmered along the backrest, and their figures vanished into it. The booth returned to silence, leaving only empty wine glasses, scattered bottles, and the unsigned contract quietly on the table. Everything looked as peaceful as before. Inside Kong Ming'an's room at the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce headquarters, the Ice Empress lay sprawled on the soft bed, her small face buried in the quilt that still carried Kong Ming'an's faint, crisp scent. Her eyes glowed with a faint silver light as she linked into the spiritual pivot network to read the newly updated storybook. Then, unexpectedly, she frowned. A sudden unease prickled at her. She sat up and looked around. "Where did that guy run off to?" she pouted. He'd said he was going out and she didn't need to follow, and then he'd simply disappeared, leaving her alone in the room. She was strangely annoyed. She hesitated a moment, then remembered she could reach him instantly. She connected to the spiritual pivot network and initiated a voice call to Kong Ming'an. The line connected, and his calm voice answered, faint in her ear. "Here, handling some things." She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His words came in pauses. The Ice Empress felt the pauses more than the words. Still, she asked, "Can you handle it? If not, call me." "It's fine. It might take some time." The pause around "might take some time" made her frown deeper, not because of the pause itself, but because of that uncertainty, she lost the urge to keep chatting. All right then, she said tersely. Okay, Kong Ming'an replied. They disconnected. The Ice Empress lay back down on his bed, cheeks puffed slightly. Unease lingered. She sent a message with her mind. Can you really handle it? Yes, don't worry. It's nothing, came his instant reply. She raised an eyebrow and began to type. Then come back early when you're done. I'll wait for you. Halfway through, she stopped. The words felt needless. One by one, she deleted them until all that remained was a short, resigned, "Oh." She disconnected from the spiritual pivot network and murmured to herself, trying to persuade her own heart, "This is just a routine check. I'm not worried. It's nothing big. Nothing big." To reassure herself further, she turned, hugged the pillow Kong Ming'an usually used, buried her face in it, inhaled deeply, and slowly closed her eyes. He would be back after she woke up, right? 116. Those who are terminally ill. The next afternoon, inside Shrek City, in the bedroom of an advanced hotel suite, the sensual haze that had clung to the room all night was gone. Calm had returned. Kong Ming'an sat on the edge of the bed in a clean bathrobe, rubbing at a faintly aching temple. Last night had gone far beyond anything he'd expected. It had spun out of control and slidden into excess. Why had it turned out like this? He turned the question over in his mind. The bathroom door opened, and a cloud of steam rolled out. Zhang Lexuan stepped out, also in a fresh bathrobe, her damp hair falling over her shoulders. The drunken disarray and abandon of the previous night had been washed away. She wore her familiar, cool, detached expression. But the tolerance and gentleness she usually bore toward the world were gone. Her gaze was direct, almost morbid, fixed on the man on the bedside. Her red lips parted. Continue? Kong Ming'an was silent for a moment. The world had clearly gone mad in ways he couldn't fathom. You can't handle it, he said bluntly. For the first time since she'd left the bathroom, Zhang Lexuan paused. Then she simply leaned forward, letting her tall, voluptuous body press fully against his. Her hands curled around his neck. Her lips brushed the side of it with a possessive, lingering touch. You can make me handle it, she whispered, glancing at her pale wrist. Where the chains had bitten into her last night, there should have been bruises. There was nothing. Kong Ming'an felt a fresh twinge behind his eyes. He kept one hand at her waist and said quietly, "That's not how the power of life is meant to be used." Why not? She asked. She had fainted more than once, yet the young man had shown no fatigue. It was obvious something unnatural was at work. He had repeatedly cheated by using the life force ability. It wasn't fair. Kong Ming'an didn't answer straight away. He had personally adjusted the passive effect of the gold of life, amplifying it tenfold. The life force circulated naturally, nourishing the body and keeping exhaustion at bay. The results were undeniable. He sighed, refocusing. Let's talk about Shrek's current situation and your plans going forward. At that, Zhang Lexuan obediently began to recount, close to his ear, the shifts in power at Shrek Academy, how the old elders' authority had been redistributed after their deaths, Yan Xiaojie's dismissal, and Mu En's training program for her. Her voice was calm and steady, devoid of the urgency with which she'd solicited kisses and the chains last night, though she hugged him as she spoke. Kong Ming'an listened. When she finished, he nodded. Understood. Proceed normally. Take power and cultivate at your own pace. If you need cultivation resources, commercial or military support, the Merchant Association will back you. She tightened her arms a fraction and murmured into his ear. Yes, he studied her. This complete submission, the edge of self-abasement in her tone, worried him. You don't have to treat yourself entirely like a tool, he said. Zhang Lexuan hesitated, then replied softly, You can treat me like a toy too. Kong Ming'an said nothing. He found himself tightening his hold on her waist almost without realizing it. After a long moment, they separated. He raised his hand and a contract materialized, which he pushed toward her. Look it over and tell me if anything needs changing. She scanned the clauses quickly, made no corrections to the existing text, then paused. Slowly, she extended a fingertip and appended a single clause at the end, once every 3 days. Kong Ming'an's expression tightened. After a long, uneasy silence, he managed, Delete it. Zhang Lexuan shook her head, her earlier complacency gone. No, not that. They bargained, Minutes slid by as they argued over frequency until the clause was rewritten, once every 2 weeks and with an added requirement for a situation report. Zhang Lexuan nodded in agreement. They finalized the contract. Each of them imprinted their mark using spirit power and mental force. A flash of light and the contract condensed into 2 streaks that vanished into their glabella. Silence fell. Kong Ming'an was the first to stand. He adjusted his robe. "Then I'll go," he said. Zhang Lexuan only nodded. She watched him step through the gray spatial portal until his figure disappeared. Only when the spatial ripples faded and the room was empty did the mask of composed calm she wore begin to crack. Suddenly drained, she collapsed backward onto the messy bed, which still held traces of their shared scent. One hand went weakly to her face. What had she done? Had the long-term mental suppression finally broken? Had she given in because she was so empty and desperate she had to cling to anything, even something as ludicrous and self-consuming as that? She had handed herself over, absurdly, completely. She pressed her palms to her temples and tried to steady her breathing. But each inhalation brought flashes of the night. Lips, cheeks, neck, collarbones, chest, abdomen. Intimate scenes replaying uncontrollably. Shame, confusion, a strangling sense of restraint and suffocation washed over her. And yet, interlaced with those feelings, a dark, guilty satisfaction rose up, and it calmed the anxious restlessness she had carried for so long. Zhang Lexuan closed her eyes. A little realization settled in her chest. She was probably truly ill, incurable. 117. Hyote's terrible sleeping posture. Silent ripples of space parted in Kong Ming'an's study at the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce headquarters, and he stepped out into the familiar room. The furnishings were unchanged. He scanned the room but didn't see the Ice Empress. It wasn't until he pushed open the bedroom door that he found her, fast asleep, sprawled crookedly across his not very large but comfortable bed, utterly ungainly in repose. She lay sunk into the soft mattress, the thin blanket she'd had thrown over her kicked down to the foot of the bed. She wore only a delicate green and white silk nightgown with narrow straps. One strap had slipped off her shoulder, exposing a sweep of smooth skin and an elegant collarbone. The proud, cool expression she usually wore, her little tsundere pride and reserved aura, was gone. In sleep, her face was defenseless and serene. Her legs were bare. She hadn't on her usual black stockings, and they were casually crossed. Her skin was luminous as jade, the lines of her legs graceful, her small feet perfect and slightly pink at the toes. Because of the way she'd flopped, the hem of the nightgown had ridden up to her thighs, revealing more than it usually would. Kong Ming'an's gaze hesitated, then he turned his eyes away. After last night, something in him had shifted. The indifference he usually felt thinner now. He rubbed his brow, mentally telling himself to restrain his thoughts and move toward the bed. At the faint change of the room's aura, the Ice Empress's long lashes fluttered. She blinked awake slowly, eyes hazy gold. For a moment, she brightened at seeing him, then a look of displeasure crossed her face. She made a disgruntled sound. Still half asleep and reflexive, she lifted her stockingless, smooth foot and, in a trace of morning temper, flicked it at him. The motion wasn't hard, but it carried clear annoyance. Kong Ming'an reacted instantly, catching the slender foot before it reached him. It was warm and soft, like holding polished jade, almost too small to fit comfortably in his hand. "What are you doing?" he asked, still holding her foot. Now fully awake, the Ice Empress sneered. She tried to pull her foot back, but couldn't, and fixed him with a glare. "So you finally decided to come back? Aren't I back now?" Kong Ming'an replied calmly, keeping his composure. She snorted, but didn't answer. She couldn't explain why she'd been irritable. The kick had been an instinctive release of frustration. Now that she'd done it, she felt better. She tried to withdraw her foot again, and found Kong Ming'an hadn't only held it, but was studying it, fingertips pressing lightly as if considering something. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. Color rushed up the Ice Empress's cheeks, and she snapped, furious. "Are you trying to get yourself killed, you?" Kong Ming'an let go as she snapped. But the Ice Empress hissed and sprang up from the bed, flailing arms and legs in a short, furious outburst. A minute later, the room settled into calm. Kong Ming'an sat on the edge of the bed, his clothes slightly ruffled. The Ice Empress, puffed up with indignation, sat farther away, arms crossed, face turned from him, her posture shouting that she was very angry, her ears faintly reddened. I really didn't mean to, Kong Ming'an tried to explain. I just couldn't resist. It's like when you can't help but pat a cat's head, catching your foot and squeezing it. Isn't that reasonable? Humph. She gave him a look of disgust, the expression she reserved for rubbish. After a long beat, she drew a breath, snorted softly, and at last let it drop. Still, she asked, begrudgingly curious, "Fine. Where did you go for so long?" "I took care of some things. They're settled," he answered vaguely. She made no effort to press him further. She leaned forward unconsciously and sniffed the air around him with her small nose, frowning. "You smell clean. Did you shower before you came back?" She peered him over from head to toe. "And you weren't wearing these clothes when you left, were you?" "The ones I left and got dirty. I changed when I returned." Kong Ming'an's face didn't shift. His tone was steady. The Ice Empress's frown deepened. Something in her told her this wasn't the whole story, but she was straightforward, not one for digging at puzzles she didn't care to solve. As long as he'd come back safe, that was enough. Then Kong Ming'an surprised her. "Want to go out for a walk?" She raised an eyebrow. "What for?" "Consider it an apology for earlier," he said, offering the thinest of excuses. It wasn't a bad one. She'd been bored cooped up in the room with him for too long. She turned her face away to hide the momentary spark of interest, but answered aloud, "I'm only your guard." Kong Ming'an accepted that readily. "Right, I want to go out, but I don't want anything to happen, so I need your protection." The Ice Empress snorted, the smallest concession in her tone. "Fine, let's go." She swung her legs over the bed and pushed off lightly. With a casual wave of her hand and a ripple of spirit power, the thin nightgown shimmered and transformed into the familiar white and green dress she usually wore. Black stockings slid up her legs again. Kong Ming'an's gaze lingered a beat on the stockinged legs, and an absurd thought, what if she wore white stockings instead, flickered through his head before he suppressed it. As he'd done countless times, he offered his hand. The Ice Empress didn't hesitate. She lifted her hand and placed it in his palm, fingers warm and certain. "Let's go," she said. They left the room together. 118. Tang San, who intermittently cosplays as a stray dog. Time passed, and a little over a month later, it was finally Shrek's enrollment day. Outside the walls of Shrek City, a figure in tattered clothes, his body wrapped in bandages in several places, and looking every bit the beggar, arrived, Tang San. He stood and stared at the towering city walls, let out a long, relieved sigh, unconsciously spread his arms, and bathed in the sunlight pouring into Shrek. Excitement surged through him. He had finally arrived. Since that journey to the ice and fire yin-yang well years ago, after the immortal herb sacrifice had failed, he had been forced into a life of wandering. It wasn't that he didn't want comfort. Staying in a city seemed only to bring continuous misfortune. Even though he was often chased by spirit beasts in the wild, wandering was better than constant calamity, so he lived rough while diligently advancing his god test. Fortunately, despite everything, his cultivation had reached the 3-ring level, 1 yellow ring and 2 purple rings, thanks to his world-shocking talent. Tang San could sense the god test inside him. By now, he had already reached its 4th trial. The god test had a degree of autonomy. When there was no presiding judge, it generated assessment tasks based on the examinee's circumstances. His first 3 tests were clear and straightforward: hunt spirit beasts. With his prodigious talent, those tasks were not difficult. He passed them and received the reward, the power of the Asura god. He could not say which aspects of the original Asura god the power came from. He did not possess all the god realm memories. But once the god test awarded him the treasure, that rare, high-quality power fused into him through the test. Part of it merged into the clear sky hammer, which seemed to evolve. Blood-red streaks appeared along its surface, and a darker, more violent chi surfaced. The rest strengthened his body and directly increased his spirit power. Besides his talent, this Asura god power had helped accelerate his cultivation. Clenching his fist, Tang San could hardly wait to enter the city and begin anew. Then he was stopped. "What do you think you're doing? This isn't a place for beggars. Get lost now," the gate soldier barked, his face full of disdain. Tang San frowned and forced a patient tone. "I'm here to register at Shrek. I'm not a beggar." The soldier snorted. Ha, you? A beggar trying to apply to Shrek? Tang San had to bite the corner of his lip. It was only a mere soldier. If he acted rashly, he might draw attention and be thrown into jail before he even made it inside. He had narrowly reached Shrek City and did not want to miss the registration deadline. After a pause, he decided to avoid trouble. He stepped forward, quietly activated controlling crane catching dragon, and slipped several silver coins into the soldier's palm. The soldier's expression changed instantly. He gave Tang San a long look, cleared his throat, and said, "Go on in, but don't cause any trouble." Tang San nodded and hurried through the gate. Once he had put some distance between himself and the crowd and confirmed no one followed, he took in the bustling, peaceful life within Shrek City and felt a deep, liberating sense of freedom. He was finally taking his first step. He decided not to go straight to Shrek. First, he needed to find somewhere to change out of these rags. He touched the pile of more than 20 gold coins in his pocket and smiled. He hadn't been completely unlucky. About a month earlier, he'd stolen a storage spirit tool from a young master, sold its contents and the tool itself, and used the money to buy a recommendation letter for Shrek. The rest he kept as a reserve, useful now since he'd just bribed the guard. Walking down the street, thinking all this over, he felt luck was finally turning. But he hadn't gone far when a thick, powerful hand slammed onto his shoulder. He turned to see several burly, muscular men glaring at him. Behind them stood a swaggering, luxuriously dressed blonde youth, sneering. Tang San's pupils tightened. He tried to bolt, but the big men pinned him immediately. The blonde stepped forward, pressed his boot to Tang San's face, and ground his shoe back and forth before sneering. "What a small world, little thief! Stealing Dai Huabin's things. Don't you want to live? Beat him to death." At that command, several guards, cultivators at or above Spirit King level, surged forward and rained blows on Tang San. The others surrounded them, making it clear they were men from the White Tiger Duke's mansion and warning anyone not to interfere. Tang San curled on the ground, holding his head, taking the blows and crying out in pain. His eyes were bloodshot. He panted like an ox, and yet behind the pain a flash of crimson burned in his gaze. Violent emotions surged through him and he roared, unleashing spirit power. He leapt to his feet like a war god, forcing back the Spirit King cultivators around him. "A beggar dares to resist in the city? Keep hitting him," someone snapped. The order came down, and the fledgling spark of resistance was extinguished. More blows fell, and Tang San was kicked and hurled about like a stray dog on the roadside. He lay there, battered and humiliated. At that moment, elsewhere at the enrollment area, a young man with blue hair and clean clothes walked in carrying a simple bag. His blue eyes were clear, but in them was a deep, buried hatred. Huo Yuhao clenched his hand around the dark green jade pendant his sect master had given him, inhaled, and steeled himself. His path of revenge began here. The first name on his list, Dai Huabin, who was also enrolling today. 119, Orange's Suspicion. Inside Kong Ming'an's office at the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce headquarters, Juzi stood quietly to the side. She had just finished reporting on the Chamber's recent cooperation with the Tianhun Empire to promote the Soul Point system and the pilot program for artificial spirit rings. Her gaze lingered on Kong Ming'an. He was leaning against the edge of a large desk, eyes lowered as he reviewed the report she had handed him. Opportunities like this were rare, and Juzi found herself watching him more closely than usual. The more she looked, the more she noticed a subtle change. The gentleness she always saw in her president's eyes remained, but something else had settled over him, a steadiness that felt new, and oddly a married man's air. Juzi's eyes narrowed. An intuition told her something must have happened recently. Several candidates flashed through her mind. Miss Meng and that princess? Unlikely. Kong Ming'an had always been sensitive about age, and both of them were at least a year or two from adulthood. Miss Shui? Possible, but she hadn't been around lately. If something serious had occurred, she wouldn't have left so soon. Miss Bing? Also improbable. Aside from personality, she certainly didn't have the time for that right now. Juzi glanced toward the corner of the room where a massive ice cocoon, taller than a person, radiated an intense cold that dropped the room's temperature. A small humanoid silhouette could be vaguely made out inside. Juzi dismissed that possibility too. So, Who was it? She fell into thought. Beside her, Kong Ming'an finished the report, closed it, and said slowly, "For now, proceed according to this plan. The Tianhun Empire will prioritize the physical rollout of artificial spirit rings and the improved soul skill modules. Other regions will promote the soul points, system first, and finish the preliminary construction of the spirit power acquisition network." Juzi snapped back to attention and bowed slightly. "Understood, President." Kong Ming'an nodded. "How is contact with Shrek Academy progressing?" "Contact is good," Juzi replied. Since Shrek Academy internally announced Zhang Lexuan as the next Sea God Pavilion Master and began taking over Shrek's authority, their hostility toward the Chamber has noticeably lessened. About half a month ago, we signed our first cooperation agreement with them on expanding new student dormitories and upgrading Soul Tool facilities. She paused, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. Zhang Lexuan? If she remembered correctly, the president had gathered information on her. Nominally, she was also the president's clan sister. Juzi's eyes narrowed slightly. Kong Ming'an didn't notice the change. He simply said, "Good. If further issues arise, you may negotiate directly with Zhang Lexuan. She counts as an inside contact. The chamber can give her some support. And if the chamber needs assistance, have her arrange for Shrek to provide help." "Yes." Juzi lowered her head, and for an instant, a small, unreadable smile touched her lips. Her tone stayed steady. "I understand. I'll have a good talk with her." Kong Ming'an glanced at her, puzzled by the subtle oddity in her tone. A moment later, Juzi bowed and left. Kong Ming'an walked over to the ice cocoon, sat cross-legged, and resumed his silent role as guardian for the Ice Emperor undergoing transformation. He wasn't idle. He checked his calendar, then sent a wisp of his mind to probe Tang San's condition through the god test of destruction linked to him. In the image, Tang San appeared sprawled in a street corner, filthy and miserable. Kong Ming'an raised an eyebrow and probed the god test status. "Progress is decent," he murmured. "He's already reached the 4th test." He was slightly surprised but quickly composed himself. He wasn't sure whether this lower realm Tang San knew the full truth about the god test rewards, but a general pattern had emerged. God realm Tang San was using a dual connection, the divine thought he had placed in lower realm Tang San, together with the sea god's divine test, to gradually extract the Asura god's divine force, which easily influences minds, from the Asura god's seat and transfer it into this lower realm Tang San. The amount of Asura divine force currently injected was still sparse, almost negligible, but that seemed to be just the early stage. As the process continued into later stages, God realm Tang San would likely pour more Asura divine force into this lower Tang San until he became a full container for it. It made sense that God realm Tang San would keep other restraints on lower realm Tang San, like the God test as a leash. Tang San's methods were thorough. For Kong Ming'an, this was also good news. A lower realm Tang San carrying the sea god's divine thought, the sea god's divine test, and samples of Asura divine force was an exceptionally rare resource. Even if it wasn't used to control god positions or weaken Tang San, the Asura divine force sample alone was priceless. A perfect specimen for studying spirit power transformation and for the Star Ring, Ascending Divine Steps project. He thought for a moment and spoke softly, half to himself, half to whatever presence might listen. "It's a pity I can't interfere with the sea god's divine test. The manipulation window is too small. If I could obtain a sample of sea god divine force or Tang San's divine thought, I might be able to target god realm Tang San." He had made his request. Now he would wait to see if anything came of it. Closing his eyes, he continued coding the secondary modifications for the Lingshu protocol. He hadn't been at it long when a faint, crisp sound came from the ice cocoon. Kong Ming'an set aside his work and looked up. A crack had appeared along the cocoon, spreading rapidly. Pure, dense ice energy and a powerful newly born aura leaked from the fissures. At a point, the cocoon shattered and a small figure broke free. Kong Ming'an reached out reflexively, but the figure leaped into his arms. The body was still cold to the touch. He lowered his eyes and met a pair of golden eyes that seemed even brighter than before. The Ice Emperor stared at him, her gaze flickering as she parted her lips. "Hey, I'm human now. 120. The possibility of being discovered by the Snow Emperor." Hearing the Snow Empress's words, Kong Ming'an paused and glanced aside. Under her gaze, his throat worked, but his voice remained calm. "Stand up first. Let me check if your body has any hidden dangers." The Snow Empress narrowed her golden eyes, a smile lifting the corners of her mouth. She hummed softly, pleased with his reaction, then rose from his lap. Her bare legs slipped onto the fluffy white carpet. She walked to the bedside and sat, crossing one leg over the other. One delicate foot arched and dangled lazily toward Kong Ming'an. Lifting her chin with customary haughtiness, she fixed him with a glittering look and said, with a faint challenge, "Come and check me, then." Kong Ming'an froze. Why did she sound different after transforming? He hesitated, then an odd thought hit him, and he said, "Why are you copying the Snow Empress's way of speaking?" The Snow Empress's haughty composure collapsed at once. She grit her teeth and snapped, "Who's copying the Snow Empress? I'm only asking if you're going to check me." He'd been right. She was imitating that other manner. Kong Ming'an nodded slowly. "Huh, so you aren't just being yourself. Don't lie to me. Look me in the eye when you lie," she protested, exasperated. She couldn't help herself. She jumped up and gave him 2 light punches, more venting than harm. Then she sat back down, crossed her arms, and huffed, indignant. "Are you going to check or not? If not, don't bother me. I have games to play." That tone betrayed a flustered woman. Kong Ming'an decided swiftly, and a smile tugged at his lips. His expression softened as he stood and said, "Don't worry, I'll check you now." He stepped forward, moved her raised foot aside, and took her hand. A ripple of spirit power and mental force flowed from his palm as he examined her condition after the transformation. The inspection was thorough and quick. As he expected, her change into human form was flawless. There were no hidden defects. Releasing her hand, he said, "Let me see your spirit rings." She obliged, lifting her hand casually. 9 spirit rings rose from around her feet, 5 black and 4 red, revolving into place with a heavy, controlled presence. The aura that radiated made it plain. She was a 99th level limit Duluo. Feeling the surge of powerful, perfectly contained energy, the Snow Empress's eyes brightened with excitement. In a human body, she could wield her spirit power with far fewer restrictions than in her spirit beast form. Best of all, the sense of a heavenly tribulation hanging over her, the constant sword of Damocles feeling, had vanished. That relief alone explained why she usually stayed in human guise once she learned how. She pursed her lips. If this method of transformation became common knowledge, the Snow Empress realized the balance of the spirit beast world could be upended. How many spirit beasts, stalled at a bottleneck or terrified of heavenly tribulation, would choose to transform into humans and slip into human society? It might be blessing or curse, she couldn't say. The thought passed quickly. Selfishly, she concluded it didn't matter much to her, as long as her homeland, the extreme north, and her people were safe. Kong Ming'an had sworn to protect the land. If he kept that promise, she needn't worry about the rest. The feeling of complicated, rueful warmth at the sight of the young man in front of her made her uneasy in a way she couldn't name. Kong Ming'an watched the spirit rings for a moment, then withdrew his gaze. He spoke plainly. "The soul points system is running smoothly, and energy is being collected as planned. Once we perfect the universal cultivation method for the star ring, you can condense your own. The guild-collected energy will be prioritized for you, so you can advance quickly through the first 2 star rings." "Understood," the Snow Empress answered. Kong Ming'an continued, "Soon you'll switch places with me. The Snow Empress has already perfected 4 star rings. The energy she needs next is enormous, and there is no available source right now, so she can return to guard me again, and you can go back to the extreme north to cultivate in seclusion. I can keep using the Snow Empress as a template to predict possible future developments of the Star Ring path." "No," the Snow Empress interrupted him without hesitation. Kong Ming'an blinked in confusion, and she glanced away, jaw set, voice unexpectedly firm. "I want to be with the Snow Empress, but that will seriously reduce your cultivation efficiency," he said. "I don't care," she snorted, turning her face aside. Her stubbornness was unmistakable. "Wherever the Snow Empress is, I'll be. If she wants to stay by your side, then I must stay with her." Kong Ming'an watched her for a few seconds and then, with a small, resigned smile, nodded. "All right, as you wish." She offered a triumphant little huff and turned her head away. Clutching the hem of her skirt so tightly her fingers whitened, Kong Ming'an didn't notice the small movement. He was multitasking. Half his attention went to recording the Snow Empress's data into the Ling Shu network, and the other half drifted to other problems. He didn't mind her decision to stay. One person more or less at his side didn't change much, and the Snow Empress's presence might even temper the other woman's temper. At least she might act less recklessly with her around. It also provided an additional layer of security. But there was a complication: his bi-weekly contract with Zhang Lexuan. The Snow Empress hadn't noticed anything amiss, and even if she sensed something, she would probably lose interest and forget. The real worry was whether the Snow Emperor, ruler of the Snow Empress's homeland, might discover the truth if the Empress remained by his side. If the Snow Emperor found out, everything could be exposed. What would he do then? Kong Ming'an let the thought hang in his mind as he continued his work, his expression thoughtful. The question of discovery by the Snow Emperor was a potential crisis he would need to resolve. One more knot to untie before the calm could truly settle over the extreme north.